The historic Forsyth Park in Ballroom in Savannah, Georgia, hummed with the warm energy of celebration as 65-year-old Captain Robert West's retirement party reached its crescendo. 43 years of distinguished service in the United States Air Force had earned him this moment, complete with a standing ovation from his former squadron members, a presentation of his final commendation from the base commander, and enough military precision in the evening's organization to rival a state dinner. The venue itself spoke of Southern elegance and military tradition, with its soaring ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers that cast warm golden light across round tables draped in crisp white linens. American flags stood proudly alongside the Georgia state flag, while black and white photographs of Captain West's career milestones lined the walls, chronicling his journey from a young second lieutenant fresh out of the academy to the respected pilot and instructor who had trained hundreds of aviators over for decades. At the head table, Captain West sat in his dress blues, every ribbon and medal perfectly aligned, his silver hair still maintaining the precise military cut he'd worn since his 20s. His wife Margaret, elegant in navy blue silk that complemented her husband's uniform, beamed with the pride of a woman who had supported her husband through countless deployments, base transfers, and the unique challenges of military life. Their love story was legendary among their circle, high school sweethearts who had weathered 42 years of marriage with the same discipline and commitment that had defined Robert's military career. But it was at table 7, tucked away near the back corner of the ballroom, where our story truly begins. Hannah West sat in a simple black dress from Target that she'd owned for 3 years, the kind of understated garment that was appropriate for any occasion but memorable for none. Her auburn hair, inherited from her mother but lacking Margaret's careful styling, was pulled back in a practical ponytail secured with an elastic band that had seen better days. At 29, Hannah possessed the kind of quiet intelligence that often went unnoticed in loud rooms full of accomplished people discussing their impressive careers and substantial achievements. Her hands, despite a thorough scrubbing before the party, still showed faint traces of blue ink under her fingernails from this morning's editing session. To everyone at this celebration, she was simply Hannah West, the oldest child who had somehow failed to live up to the promise of her early academic success. The daughter who had graduated summa cum laude with a chemistry degree from Georgia Tech only to disappear into what her family politely called her a creative phase. Her younger brother Jake, 37, and radiating the confidence that comes from building a successful dental practice from scratch, held court at table 3 with his wife Michelle and their 2 perfectly behaved children. His tales of practice expansion, new equipment purchases, and patient satisfaction ratings commanded respectful attention from the other professionals in attendance. Jake had always been the reliable one, the son who had followed a clear path from pre-dental studies to dental school to residency to practice ownership, each step logical and predictable and approved by everyone who mattered. Her sister Laura, 26, and glowing with the satisfaction of someone who had found her calling, sat at table 5 with her teacher colleagues from Savannah Elementary, where she had quickly become known for her innovative approach to third-grade literacy. Laura's stories of breakthrough moments with struggling readers and creative classroom projects earned knowing nods from the educators present, people who understood the special satisfaction that comes from shaping young minds and making a real difference in children's lives. The contrast between her siblings' clear success stories and Hannah's apparent lack of direction was not lost on anyone, least of all Hannah herself. She had spent the first hour of the party fielding the same polite but pointed questions she encountered at every family gathering. Still living in that little apartment downtown? Any exciting job prospects? Have you thought about going back to school? Each inquiry carried the underlying assumption that she was somehow stuck, unable to move forward, trapped in an extended adolescence while her peers built careers and families and futures. The truth was more complicated, but Hannah had learned long ago that explaining her actual situation to her family only led to more confusion and unsolicited advice. It was easier to let them maintain their narrative of concern and disappointment than to try to help them understand a world they had never encountered and weren't particularly interested in exploring. As the evening progressed and the wine flowed freely, the conversations grew louder and more animated. Stories of professional achievements mixed with discussions of real estate investments, vacation plans, and children's academic accomplishments. Hannah found herself increasingly invisible, watching the social dynamics play out around her like an anthropologist studying a culture she understood but could never quite belong to. It was during the dessert course, as Captain West prepared to give his final remarks of the evening, that Margaret West rose from her seat at the head table, champagne glass in hand, and called for attention. The ballroom gradually quieted as conversations died down, and all eyes turned toward the elegant woman who had been the perfect military spouse for decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to addressing rooms full of military families. Before Robert gives his closing remarks, I wanted to take a moment to share some personal pride as a mother. She paused for effect, her smile encompassing the entire room but lingering meaningfully on table 3 where Jake sat with his family. "We are so incredibly proud of our son Jake, who has built such a successful dental practice that is now expanding to a second location. He's already providing dental care for 3 elementary schools in the district, and his community service has been recognized by the Savannah Chamber of Commerce." The applause was warm and sustained, with several people calling out congratulations to Jake, who stood briefly to acknowledge the recognition. "And our Laura," Margaret continued, her beam widening as she turned toward table 5, who has become one of the most beloved teachers at Savannah Elementary. Just last month, her innovative literacy program was selected as a model for the entire school district. "She's touching so many young lives every single day, shaping the future of our community one child at a time." Again, enthusiastic applause filled the room, with Laura's teaching colleagues rising to give her a standing ovation. Margaret paused, and Hannah felt her stomach tighten as she realized what was coming next. The inevitable acknowledgement that would somehow manage to be both loving and dismissive, supportive and subtly critical. The kind of maternal comment that carried 40 years of accumulated worry disguised as celebration. "And our Hannah," Margaret said finally, her tone shifting slightly to what Hannah recognized as her mother's making the best of things a voice. "Oh well, Hannah is still finding her path. She makes these little videos for YouTube, talking about science and things. It's very creative, very modern. At least it's not drugs, right?" The laughter that rippled through the ballroom was good-natured but pointed, the kind of gentle mockery that families often use to cope with the members who don't fit neatly into conventional success categories. Hannah heard someone at a nearby table whisper, "YouTube videos?" At her age, followed by sympathetic murmuring about young people these days and their strange career choices. Hannah's grip tightened on her water glass as she maintained her practiced smile, the same expression she'd perfected over years of family gatherings where her life choices were analyzed, questioned, and found wanting. She nodded graciously at the smattering of polite applause that followed her mother's backhanded acknowledgement, even as she felt the familiar burn of frustration and disappointment that always accompanied these public evaluations of her worth. Captain West rose then, beginning his prepared remarks about service and sacrifice and the importance of family support, but Hannah barely heard the words. She was too busy calculating how long she needed to stay before she could politely excuse herself, drive home to her studio apartment, and return to the work that actually mattered to her, the work that none of these well-meaning people could see the value in because it didn't fit their definitions of legitimate success. As her father's speech continued and the crowd hung on every word about duty and honor and building something lasting, Hannah sat in her corner chair, smiled when expected, and quietly planned her escape from this room full of people who loved her but would never understand her. Part 2. The Turn. Silent Determination. The drive home through Savannah's historic district felt longer than usual, despite the familiar route through cobblestone streets lined with ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Hannah's 15-year-old Honda CR-V hummed quietly as she navigated past the elegant antebellum mansions that housed the city's established families, the same families whose children had grown up to become doctors and lawyers and business owners, following paths that made sense to everyone who mattered. The radio played softly, but Hannah barely registered the music as she replayed the evening's events in her mind. Her mother's well-intentioned but devastating introduction echoed in her thoughts, each word carefully chosen to acknowledge her existence while simultaneously dismissing her accomplishments. Little videos for YouTube, as if 2 years of intensive work, hundreds of hours of research, and a growing community of engaged viewers could be reduced to such a trivial description. She pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, a modest 2-story building that housed young professionals, graduate students, and others who were either just starting their careers or, in her case, building something that didn't fit traditional career categories. The building wasn't much to look at from the outside, built in the 1980s with practical efficiency rather than aesthetic appeal, but it served her purposes perfectly. Most importantly, it was affordable enough that she could dedicate most of her energy and resources to her real work rather than expensive housing. Hannah climbed the external staircase to her second-floor unit, keys jingling as she unlocked the door to apartment 2B. The space that greeted her was compact but carefully organized, every square foot utilized with the precision of someone who had learned to maximize limited resources. The main room served triple duty as living room, office, and video studio, with a modest couch positioned against one wall facing a small television that she rarely had time to watch. But it was the far corner of the room that revealed the true purpose of this space. A professional-grade camera mounted on a sturdy tripod pointed toward a carefully arranged backdrop consisting of a clean white wall adorned with periodic table elements and molecular structure diagrams that Hannah had printed and laminated herself. 2 softbox lights flanked the recording area, positioned to eliminate shadows and create the clear, even lighting that was essential for educational content. A compact desk held her editing computer, a machine she had built herself from carefully researched components to handle the demanding processing requirements of video production. External hard drives were stacked neatly beside the monitor, containing hundreds of hours of raw footage, completed projects, and backup files that represented 2 years of intensive work. A small whiteboard covered in chemical equations and video planning notes hung on the wall above the desk, serving as both a creative tool and a constant reminder of the projects that demanded her attention. This was the headquarters of Hannah Makes, the YouTube channel that her family dismissed as a hobby, but which had quietly grown into something far more significant than anyone at tonight's party could have imagined. What had started as a simple desire to share her love of chemistry with the world had evolved into a comprehensive educational platform that was reaching thousands of students, teachers, and curious minds across the globe. Hannah kicked off her uncomfortable dress shoes and changed into the comfortable jeans and oversized chemistry department t-shirt that served as her unofficial uniform. This was her real self, not the polished version she presented at family gatherings, but the person who felt most authentic when surrounded by the tools and materials of her chosen profession. She settled into her desk chair and opened her laptop, immediately pulling up the analytics dashboard for her channel. The numbers told a story that would have shocked everyone at tonight's party. Over the past month, her videos had accumulated 2.3 million views from viewers in 47 countries. Her subscriber count had grown to 847,000 people who actively chose to learn from her content, who trusted her explanations, and who regularly engaged with her educational materials. But the numbers only told part of the story. Hannah scrolled through the comments section of her most recent video, Why does soap actually work against viruses? The responses revealed the true impact of her work. A high school student in rural Alabama thanked her for making chemistry accessible and inspiring him to consider a career in science. A teacher in Philadelphia explained how she used Hannah's videos to supplement her curriculum, noting that her students finally understood molecular interactions after watching Hannah's clear explanations. A parent wrote about watching Hannah's videos with her homeschooled daughter, describing how Hannah's enthusiasm had transformed science from a dreaded subject into an adventure of discovery. An international student preparing for university entrance exams credited Hannah's channel with helping him understand concepts that his textbooks had failed to make clear. These were the moments that mattered to Hannah, the evidence that her work was reaching people who needed it, who benefited from her unique ability to translate complex scientific concepts into language that anyone could understand and appreciate. She wasn't just making videos. She was building bridges between the intimidating world of academic science and the curious minds of ordinary people who deserved to understand the fascinating processes that governed their daily lives. The Patreon platform showed equally encouraging numbers. Nearly 12,000 supporters contributed monthly donations ranging from $5 to several hundred, enabling Hannah to invest in better equipment, dedicate more time to research, and maintain the high production standards that set her content apart from the countless other educational channels competing for attention online. But more than the financial support, it was the personal messages from patrons that reminded Hannah why she had started this journey. Teachers shared stories of students who had discovered their passion for science through her videos. Parents described family dinner conversations sparked by Hannah's explanations of everyday chemical processes. Graduate students thanked her for providing clear foundations that helped them understand advanced concepts in their university courses. Hannah opened her planning document for the upcoming week, a detailed schedule that would have impressed any project manager for its thoroughness and ambition. Monday was reserved for filming 3 new videos in her A Kitchen Chemistry series, explaining the science behind baking, fermentation, and food preservation. Tuesday meant editing and fact-checking, ensuring that every explanation was accurate and accessible. Wednesday was dedicated to responding to viewer questions and planning future content based on subscriber requests and current events. Thursday and Friday were blocked out for a special project that had been consuming her thoughts for months. Hannah had been developing a comprehensive curriculum called A Science Without Snobbery, designed to make advanced scientific concepts accessible to students who had been intimidated or excluded by traditional academic approaches. The curriculum would include video lessons, interactive experiments using household materials, and assessment tools that encouraged exploration rather than memorization. But Hannah's ambitions extended far beyond individual videos and educational materials. She had been quietly developing plans for something much larger, something that could transform how young people, particularly girls and students from underrepresented communities, encountered science education. The idea had been growing in her mind for months, fueled by the letters she received from students who felt excluded from traditional academic environments and hungry for alternatives that honored both rigor and accessibility. Tonight's humiliation at her father's party had crystallized her determination. She was tired of apologizing for her unconventional path, tired of accepting her family's narrative that she was somehow failing to achieve her potential. It was time to scale up, to transform her solo operation into something that could reach exponentially more students and create lasting change in how science education was approached and valued. Hannah pulled out a notebook and began sketching the framework for her next phase of growth. She would need to rent proper studio space, equipment that could handle more ambitious productions, and most importantly, she would need help. The vision forming in her mind required a team, people who shared her commitment to accessible education and her belief that complex ideas could be communicated with clarity and enthusiasm without sacrificing intellectual rigor. As the clock approached midnight and Savannah settled into quiet around her, Hannah worked with the focused intensity that had always characterized her approach to challenges. Tonight had been difficult, but it had also been clarifying. She knew exactly who she was and what she was building. Now it was time to show the world, starting with the people who thought they knew her best. Part 3. Growth, First Recognition and Breakthrough. The following Monday morning found Hannah standing in the doorway of a small commercial space in Savannah's emerging arts district, a 1,200 square foot former print shop that smelled of old ink and possibility. The rent was $2,800 per month, which represented nearly half of her current monthly income from Patreon and occasional freelance science writing. But Hannah had made her decision during those late-night planning sessions after her father's party. If she was going to build something substantial, she needed to think beyond the constraints of her apartment studio. The space required significant work to transform it into a proper video production facility. The concrete floors needed covering, the walls required fresh paint and proper acoustic treatment, and the lighting situation was entirely inadequate for the quality content Hannah envisioned. But she could see the potential in the high ceilings and large windows that faced north, providing the consistent natural light that would enhance her video production values. Hannah spent the next 6 weeks transforming the space with her own hands and a carefully managed budget. She painted the walls a neutral grey that would serve as an effective backdrop for various video setups. She installed sound dampening panels made from acoustic foam that she had researched extensively to ensure optimal audio quality without breaking her limited budget. The flooring project consumed an entire weekend and most of her emergency savings, but the result was a clean, professional surface that could accommodate multiple camera angles and lighting configurations. The equipment purchases required even more careful financial planning. Hannah had spent months researching cameras, microphones, and lighting systems that would provide professional results without the astronomical costs typically associated with broadcast quality equipment. She settled on a mirrorless camera system that offered excellent video capabilities, invested in a wireless microphone setup that would allow her to move freely during demonstrations, and purchased a comprehensive lighting kit that could adapt to different types of content. But perhaps the most significant investment was hiring Marcus Chen, a recent film school graduate who had been working part-time at a local video production company while building his portfolio. Marcus brought technical skills that complemented Hannah's content expertise, and more importantly, he shared her vision of making education more accessible and engaging. His editing abilities transformed Hannah's raw footage into polished, professional content that maintained the warmth and personality of her original apartment-based videos while achieving a level of production quality that could compete with larger educational channels. The financial reality of this expansion was sobering. Hannah's monthly expenses had quadrupled overnight, while her income remained relatively modest and unpredictable. She found herself checking her bank balance obsessively, calculating and recalculating whether she could sustain this level of investment long enough to see meaningful growth. There were nights when she lay awake wondering if her family's concerns about financial stability were actually valid, if she was being recklessly optimistic about the viability of her unconventional career path. The pressure intensified when Dr. Richard Blackwood, a chemistry professor at Emory University with a substantial social media following, published a video response to one of Hannah's recent uploads about molecular bonding. His critique was delivered with academic authority and thinly veiled condescension, questioning Hannah's credentials and suggesting that her simplified explanations were potentially misleading students who needed rigorous academic preparation. While Ms. West's enthusiasm is admirable, a Dr. Blackwood intoned in his precisely articulated academic manner, her lack of advanced degrees and research experience raises serious concerns about the accuracy and depth of her scientific explanations. Students deserve instruction from qualified professionals, not self-appointed educators who prioritize entertainment over educational rigor. The video gained traction quickly, shared by other academics who had grown increasingly concerned about the proliferation of unvetted educational content online. Hannah watched her subscriber count drop by 15,000 people within a week, while her comment sections filled with debates about qualifications, credibility, and the responsibilities of educational content creators. The criticism cut deeper than Hannah had anticipated, not because she doubted her own knowledge, but because it forced her to confront questions she had been avoiding about her place in the broader educational landscape. Did she have the right to teach without traditional credentials? Was her approach to science communication helping students or potentially harming their academic development? The uncertainty that had been lurking beneath her confidence suddenly demanded attention and resolution. Her Patreon income dropped significantly as supporters questioned whether they should continue funding someone whose expertise was being challenged by established academics. Hannah found herself spending hours each day responding to concerned messages from teachers who used her content, parents who worried about their children's science education, and students who were confused about whether they should trust her explanations. The lowest point came 3 weeks after Dr. Blackwood's critique, when Hannah discovered that her video about climate change chemistry had been removed from a high school teacher's curriculum after parents complained about the instructor using content from an unqualified source. The teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez from Phoenix, sent Hannah a heartfelt email explaining that while she personally found the videos excellent, she couldn't risk her job by continuing to use controversial materials. Hannah sat in her new studio space, surrounded by expensive equipment and mounting bills, wondering if she had made a catastrophic mistake. The dreams of expansion and impact that had driven her to take these financial risks suddenly seemed naive and poorly planned. Maybe her family had been right. Maybe it was time to abandon this experiment and pursue something more conventional, more stable, more aligned with what everyone expected from someone with her educational background. But it was during this period of doubt and financial stress that Hannah created the video that would change everything. Working alone in her studio on a particularly difficult evening, she decided to address the criticism directly by making a deeply personal video about the relationship between mental health and brain chemistry. What really happens to your brain when you're stressed began as an attempt to explain the biochemical processes underlying anxiety and depression, but evolved into something more vulnerable and honest than anything Hannah had previously shared. Instead of her usual upbeat presentation style, Hannah spoke directly to the camera about her own experiences with academic pressure, family expectations, and the stress of building a career outside conventional boundaries. She explained how cortisol affects cognitive function, how chronic stress changes neural pathways, and why understanding these processes could help people develop more effective coping strategies. But she also shared her own struggles with self-doubt, the sleepless nights spent questioning her choices, and the way that understanding the science behind stress had helped her develop resilience. The video was rawer than her usual content, less polished in its emotional presentation but more authentic in its connection with viewers who were experiencing similar challenges. Hannah uploaded it with minimal promotion, uncertain whether this departure from her usual format would resonate with her audience or further damage her already struggling channel. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the video had accumulated more views than any of her previous uploads. Comments poured in from viewers sharing their own experiences with stress, anxiety, and the pressure to conform to others' expectations. High school students wrote about academic pressure and college selection stress. Young professionals described workplace anxiety and imposter syndrome. Parents shared stories of helping their children understand and manage emotional challenges. But more significantly, the video caught the attention of educators who recognized something special in Hannah's approach to science communication. Dr. Sarah Matiners, Director of Science Education for the Atlanta Public School System, reached out personally to discuss incorporating Hannah's content into their district's mental health curriculum. The National Science Teachers Association featured the video in their monthly newsletter, praising Hannah's ability to make complex neuroscience accessible to general audiences. Within a month, the video had surpassed 1.2 million views and had been translated into Spanish, French, and Mandarin by volunteer viewers who wanted to share the content with broader audiences. Educational websites began featuring Hannah's work, and she started receiving invitations to speak at science education conferences and teacher training workshops. The breakthrough continued when Google Education reached out through their partner outreach program, interested in developing a formal collaboration around science literacy initiatives. Their proposal involved featuring Hannah's content in Google Classroom resources, providing technical support for enhanced video production, and most importantly, offering a partnership that would give her work the institutional credibility that academic critics had questioned. Simultaneously, Hannah received an unexpected email from the Simons Foundation, an organization dedicated to advancing scientific research and education. They had been following her work and were interested in discussing a substantial grant to support her educational initiatives, particularly her plans for reaching underserved communities and encouraging young women to pursue STEM careers. The grant application process was more intensive than anything Hannah had previously undertaken, requiring detailed project proposals, budget justifications, and letters of recommendation from established educators who could vouch for her work's impact and quality. Hannah spent weeks crafting a comprehensive proposal for what she called the STEM for Girls initiative, a program designed to provide free science education resources specifically targeted at girls and young women who had been discouraged from pursuing scientific careers. The Foundation's review process took 3 months, during which Hannah continued producing content while gradually expanding her team. She hired Sarah Kim, a recent education graduate with experience in curriculum development, to help design structured learning pathways that would complement her video content. She also brought on Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired chemistry professor who served as a content advisor, ensuring that Hannah's simplified explanations maintained scientific accuracy while remaining accessible to non-specialist audiences. When the call came from the Simons Foundation in late September, Hannah was editing a video about renewable energy chemistry in her studio. The program officer, Dr. Jennifer Ross, delivered the news with obvious enthusiasm. The Foundation was awarding Hannah's STEM for Girls initiative a $5 million grant over 3 years, making it one of the largest educational grants ever given to an independent content creator. The grant funding would support the development of comprehensive science curricula, the creation of interactive educational materials, the establishment of community science centers in underserved areas, and most importantly, scholarship programs for young women pursuing STEM education. Hannah would also receive support for expanding her content production capabilities and developing partnerships with schools, libraries, and community organizations across the country. The announcement of the grant award generated significant media attention, with education publications and mainstream outlets covering Hannah's story as an example of innovative approaches to science education. Scientific American commissioned her to write a monthly column about science communication, while the TED organization invited her to give a talk about democratizing scientific knowledge. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the city of Savannah itself. Mayor Johnson contacted Hannah personally to discuss her contributions to educational innovation and community engagement. The city wanted to present her with a formal proclamation recognizing her work's impact on science education and her role in raising Savannah's profile as a center for educational innovation. Hannah stood in her studio space, now bustling with activity as her small team worked on multiple projects simultaneously, and reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been sitting in her apartment wondering if her family was right about her need to pursue more conventional success. Now she was leading a multi-million-dollar educational initiative that was changing how thousands of students encountered science education. The contrast was striking, but what surprised Hannah most was how little her fundamental work had changed. She was still making videos, still explaining complex concepts in simple language, still passionate about making science accessible to everyone who was curious enough to learn. The difference was scale and recognition, the validation that came from institutional support and the resources to pursue her vision without financial constraints. Yet even as her professional life transformed, Hannah remained acutely aware of the gap between her growing success and her family's continued perception of her as the underachieving daughter who was still figuring out her life. They had no idea that their struggling artist who was now managing a substantial organization, influencing educational policy, and building something that would outlast any traditional career achievements they could have imagined for her. Part 4. The Revelation. Unexpected Recognition. 6 months after her father's retirement party, on a crisp October morning that carried the first hints of Savannah's mild winter, Hannah found herself standing backstage at the newly constructed Savannah Community Learning Center, checking her notes one final time before what would become the most important public speaking engagement of her career. The irony was not lost on her that this moment of professional triumph was taking place just 8 miles from the country club where her mother had dismissed her work as a little videos for YouTube. The learning center itself represented everything Hannah believed about accessible education. Built with both public funding and private donations, the facility combined state-of-the-art technology with community-focused programming, offering free educational resources to students of all ages while serving as a model for similar initiatives across the Southeast. Interactive science exhibits filled the main gallery, while smaller spaces housed maker workshops, computer labs, and flexible classrooms designed to accommodate diverse learning styles and needs. What made this particular morning extraordinary was not just the center's grand opening ceremony, but Hannah's role in making it possible. The $75 million facility had been funded through a combination of municipal bonds, federal education grants, and a substantial private donation that had surprised everyone involved in the project planning. The private donor had insisted on remaining anonymous throughout the construction process, working through intermediaries and legal representatives to ensure that the focus remained on the center's educational mission rather than individual recognition. Hannah adjusted her navy blue blazer, a recent purchase that represented her growing comfort with professional presentations, and reviewed her speaking notes one final time. As the keynote speaker for the opening ceremony, she would be addressing an audience that included city officials, education leaders, community members, and a substantial contingent of local media covering the center's launch. But what she didn't know was that her family had received special invitations to attend the ceremony in honor of Captain West's decades of community service and his status as one of Savannah's most respected veterans. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with additional seating arranged to accommodate the overwhelming community interest in the center's opening. Mayor Johnson took the podium first, delivering remarks about education's role in economic development and Savannah's commitment to creating opportunities for lifelong learning. City Council members spoke about the importance of public-private partnerships and the vision required to undertake such ambitious community projects. Hannah waited nervously in the wings as the program progressed through various dignitaries and stakeholders, each adding their perspective on education, community development, and the center's potential impact. She caught glimpses of the audience through gaps in the stage curtain, noting the diverse crowd that included families with young children, high school students, college professors, and community leaders representing various civic organizations. It was during the facility's tour announcement that Hannah spotted familiar faces in the audience's middle section. Her father sat in his characteristic military posture, wearing the navy blue suit he reserved for formal occasions, while her mother had chosen a conservative dress that reflected her background as an educator. Jake and Michelle were there with their children, probably planning to explore the interactive exhibits after the ceremony. Laura sat with several of her teaching colleagues, clearly excited about the professional development opportunities the center would provide. Their presence added an unexpected emotional weight to what Hannah had anticipated would be a straightforward professional presentation. She had not spoken to her family about her involvement with the Learning Center, partly because the donor anonymity requirements had prevented her from discussing details, but mostly because she had grown accustomed to keeping her professional achievements separate from family interactions that inevitably focused on her perceived shortcomings. Dr. Patricia Williams, Hannah's content advisor and now the center's education director approached the microphone to introduce the final speaker. Her academic credentials and decades of teaching experience lent gravitas to her words as she described the vision and planning that had made the center possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Williams began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years in educational leadership. This facility represents more than just an investment in buildings and equipment. It represents a fundamental belief that education should be accessible, engaging, and relevant to everyone in our community, regardless of their background or previous academic experience. She paused, allowing the significance of that statement to resonate with an audience that included many people who had felt excluded from traditional educational institutions. "The innovative programming you'll experience here today reflects the vision and generosity of individuals who understand that learning is not confined to classrooms or limited by conventional teaching methods." Today's keynote speaker embodies that innovative spirit. Hannah felt her heart rate accelerate as Dr. Williams continued her introduction, knowing that the next few minutes would fundamentally alter her family's understanding of her work and her place in the community they all shared. "Our speaker has revolutionized science education through digital media, reaching millions of students worldwide with content that makes complex concepts accessible and exciting. Her work has been recognized by the National Science Foundation, featured in Scientific American, and adopted by school districts across the country. She has received significant grants for educational innovation and has become a leading voice in discussions about equity and accessibility in STEM education." Hannah could see her family members leaning forward in their seats, clearly puzzled by this detailed description of accomplishments that seemed far removed from their understanding of contemporary educational media. Her mother's expression showed growing confusion, while Jake appeared to be checking his phone, possibly researching the speaker's credentials. But perhaps most importantly, Dr. Williams continued, building toward the revelation that would reshape everything. Our keynote speaker is also the primary private donor whose extraordinary generosity made this facility possible. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Hannah West, founder of the STEM for Girls initiative and the visionary behind the Hannah West Community Science Center. The silence that followed was profound and complete, as if the entire auditorium had collectively held its breath. Hannah watched her family's faces transform through a sequence of emotions that began with confusion and moved rapidly through recognition, shock, and something approaching disbelief. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth in an unconscious gesture of surprise, while her father's military bearing temporarily abandoned him as he struggled to process this unexpected information. Hannah walked onto the stage with the confident stride she had developed through months of public speaking engagements, but internally she was acutely aware of her family's stunned expressions and the way this moment was recontextualizing every conversation they had ever had about her career choices and life direction. "Thank you, Dr. Williams, and thank you all for being here today," Hannah began, her voice steady despite the emotional complexity of addressing an audience that included the people who had never quite understood her work. 6 years ago, I was a chemistry graduate struggling to find my place in a world that seemed to have very specific ideas about what success should look like. I didn't fit the traditional academic path, and I wasn't interested in corporate research positions that felt disconnected from real human needs. She gestured toward the impressive facility surrounding them, its gleaming laboratories and interactive exhibits representing millions of dollars in educational investment. "This center exists because I believe that scientific literacy is not a privilege reserved for students who can afford expensive private schools or university programs. It exists because young people in communities like ours deserve access to cutting-edge educational resources and the opportunity to explore their curiosity about how the world works." Hannah's family sat transfixed as she described the center's programming, the scholarship opportunities it would provide, and the research partnerships that would bring university-level resources to community learners. They listened as she explained her vision for democratizing science education and her commitment to ensuring that economic barriers never prevented curious minds from accessing high-quality learning opportunities. The Hannah Makes YouTube channel that some of you may be familiar with was just the beginning, as she continued, allowing herself a small smile as she made direct eye contact with her mother in the audience. It taught me that there are millions of people hungry for scientific knowledge presented in ways that respect their intelligence while acknowledging their diverse educational backgrounds. This center represents the next phase of that mission, a physical space where digital education becomes tangible, interactive, and community-centered. The applause that erupted was thunderous and sustained, with the audience rising to their feet in recognition of both Hannah's vision and her extraordinary generosity in making it reality. But Hannah's attention remained focused on the middle section where her family sat, watching their faces as they processed the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Her father's expression had shifted from shock to something approaching pride mixed with bewilderment. This was his daughter, the child he had worried about, standing on stage as the honored guest at a major civic event, being celebrated for achievements that dwarfed anything he had imagined possible for someone following such an unconventional path. Jake appeared to be calculating something, possibly trying to reconcile the scale of philanthropic donation required for such a facility with his assumptions about YouTube income and educational media profitability. Michelle leaned over to whisper something to him, her expression suggesting that she was beginning to understand the implications of what they were witnessing. Laura's reaction was perhaps the most complex. As an educator herself, she immediately grasped the significance of Hannah's work in ways that the rest of the family might miss. Her expression showed recognition not just of financial success, but of meaningful impact on her own professional field, the kind of contribution that would influence how science education was approached for years to come. But it was Margaret West's reaction that captured the full emotional weight of this revelation. Hannah watched her mother's face cycle through surprise, confusion, recognition, and finally, a deep sadness that seemed to encompass years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities for genuine connection. Margaret realized in that moment that while she had been worrying about her daughter's future, Hannah had been quietly building something extraordinary that aligned perfectly with the family's values of service and education. As Hannah concluded her remarks and accepted the ceremonial key to the facility, she knew that everything between her and her family had changed irrevocably. The questions would come later, along with the apologies and the requests to understand how they had so completely misunderstood the scope and significance of her work. But for now, she simply felt the satisfaction of a mission accomplished and a vision realized, surrounded by a community that understood and valued what she had spent years building. Part 5. Reflection and Moral Lessons. The reception following the opening ceremony buzzed with excited conversations about educational innovation, community impact, and the future possibilities that the new center represented. Hannah moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions about her plans for expanding the STEM for Girls initiative to other cities. But her attention kept drifting toward the corner where her family had gathered, clearly struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Captain West was the first to approach, his military training helping him navigate the social complexity of the situation with characteristic directness. "Hannah," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just realized he had fundamentally misunderstood something important. "I think we need to talk." The conversation that followed took place in one of the center's smaller conference rooms, away from the public celebration but close enough that they could hear the ongoing festivities through the glass walls. Hannah's entire family had gathered around the polished conference table, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to embarrassment to a growing sense of pride that was complicated by their previous dismissiveness. "Help me understand," Margaret began, her educator's instincts demanding clarity even as her maternal emotions struggled with the implications. "When we've been worrying about your financial stability and career prospects, you've been building all of this?" She gestured toward the bustling facility visible through the conference room windows. Hannah nodded, choosing her words carefully. The YouTube channel was never just a hobby, Mom. It was always part of a larger vision about making science education more accessible and inclusive. The revenue from the channel, combined with the grants and partnerships I've developed, made it possible to fund this center and the scholarship programs that will support hundreds of students over the next decade. Jake leaned forward, his analytical mind working to understand the business model that had escaped his notice entirely. Hannah, when you say grants and partnerships, what kind of numbers are we talking about? I mean, a facility like this represents serious investment. The Simons Foundation grant was $5 million over 3 years, Hannah replied matter-of-factly. Google Education provided another $2 million in technical support and curriculum development funding. The Savannah City Council contributed the land and infrastructure support valued at approximately $3 million. And I provided the additional funding needed to complete the project and establish the endowment for ongoing operations. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of children's laughter from the main gallery, where families were exploring the interactive exhibits that Hannah had helped design. Laura was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Hannah, how much additional funding did you provide? $12 million, Hannah answered simply. It seemed like the right investment for something that will serve the community for decades to come. The number hit the table like a physical presence, impossible to ignore or rationalize away. Margaret's face had gone pale, while Jake appeared to be performing rapid mental calculations that weren't producing results he could easily accept. Laura stared at her older sister as if seeing her for the first time, while Michelle and the children seemed to sense the adults' confusion without fully understanding its source. $12 million, Captain West repeated slowly, his military mind struggling to reconcile this information with his understanding of YouTube economics and educational media profitability. Hannah, where does that kind of money come from? Hannah had anticipated this question and had prepared for the conversation that would finally reveal the full scope of what she had built over the past several years. The channel generates approximately $2.8 million in annual revenue through various streams, she explained. Paid subscriptions, educational licensing deals, sponsored content partnerships, and consulting fees for curriculum development. But the real financial breakthrough came when we developed the intellectual property licensing model. She pulled out her phone and showed them graphs and charts that documented the growth of her educational empire. Major publishers license our content for textbooks and online courses. Technology companies use our explanatory videos in their training programs. International education organizations translate and adapt our materials for global markets. The Harvard Business School actually uses our growth model as a case study in digital education entrepreneurship. Harvard Business School, Margaret whispered, the words carrying the weight of institutional recognition that finally made Hannah's success comprehensible within her family's value system. Hannah continued, knowing that complete transparency was the only way to bridge the gap that had separated her from her family's understanding. Last year, the total value generated by our educational content and licensing agreements exceeded $18 million. After operational expenses, taxes, and reinvestment in new programming, I've been able to build a substantial foundation dedicated to expanding access to quality science education. The information was overwhelming, but what struck Hannah's family most powerfully was not the financial success, but the realization that their daughter and sister had been quietly building something of genuine social significance while they had been treating her work as an extended phase of post-graduation confusion. Why didn't you tell us? Margaret asked, her voice breaking slightly as the full implications of their years of condescending concern became clear. Why did you let us worry about you, criticize you, Treat you like you were failing to launch? Hannah considered the question carefully, recognizing that her answer would shape their relationship going forward. Because I needed to know that you loved and respected me for who I am, not for what I could achieve or accumulate. I wanted to build something meaningful without the pressure of family expectations or the need to justify my choices to people who were measuring success by standards that didn't apply to my work. The truth of that statement settled over them like a weight. They realized that their concern for Hannah's future had been less about her happiness and more about their own comfort with how her life appeared to others. Their questions about her career prospects had been driven by their need to understand and categorize her success rather than genuine curiosity about her work's impact and significance. Jake was shaking his head slowly, processing the magnitude of his misunderstanding. Hannah, I've been offering you financial advice and career guidance while you were building something that dwarfs anything I've accomplished. I feel like such an idiot. Success isn't a competition, Hannah replied gently. Your dental practice serves hundreds of families and improves people's health and quality of life. Laura's teaching shapes young minds and creates opportunities for children who need advocate and support. What I do is different, but it's not better or more important. Laura reached across the table and took Hannah's hand. But we dismissed it. We treated your work like it was insignificant, like you were wasting your potential. How do you forgive that kind of blindness? Because you were trying to protect someone you love, Hannah said. Your concerns came from caring, even if the execution was flawed. And honestly, there were times when I wasn't sure myself whether this path would lead anywhere sustainable. The difference was that I had to find out, regardless of the risks. Captain West had been silent throughout this exchange, his analytical mind working to understand not just the scale of Hannah's achievements, but the character and vision that had made them possible. Hannah, he said finally, this isn't just about money or even about success. You've built something that will outlast all of us, something that will change lives for generations. That's the kind of service legacy that matters most. The recognition in her father's voice meant more to Hannah than any professional accolade or financial milestone. This was the man who had taught her about duty, service, and the importance of contributing something meaningful to the world. His approval, based finally on understanding rather than hope, validated not just her achievements but the values that had guided her choices. As the afternoon progressed and the family explored the center together, Hannah watched her relatives discover interactive exhibits that brought abstract scientific concepts to life, educational programs that made advanced topics accessible to learners of all backgrounds, and scholarship opportunities that would enable students who had been excluded from traditional academic pathways. Margaret spent nearly an hour in the chemistry demonstration lab, watching teenage volunteers explain molecular interactions to visiting elementary students. The sight of young people confidently sharing scientific knowledge reminded her of Hannah's early academic promise, but also helped her understand how that promise had evolved into something far more impactful than any traditional academic career could have provided. Jake found himself in deep conversation with Dr. Williams about the center's approach to science communication and its potential for expansion to other communities. His business acumen allowed him to appreciate the strategic thinking and careful planning that had made such an ambitious project possible, while his growing understanding of his sister's work helped him recognize the vision and leadership skills he had completely overlooked. Laura was perhaps the most affected by the experience, as she recognized immediately how Hannah's work addressed problems she encountered daily in her own classroom. The interactive materials, the emphasis on making complex concepts accessible, and the commitment to serving underrepresented students reflected educational philosophy that Laura had been advocating for years without having the resources to implement effectively. As the day wound down and the family prepared to leave, they gathered one final time in the conference room where their understanding had been so dramatically transformed. The conversation that followed was unlike any they had ever shared, characterized by genuine curiosity rather than word intervention, by respect for different paths to meaningful work rather than pressure to conform to conventional expectations. "Hannah," Margaret said, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and regret, "I owe you an apology that goes beyond words. We've been so focused on what we thought your life should look like that we completely missed the extraordinary thing you were actually building." "We all did," Captain West added. "And in doing so, we failed to give you the support and recognition you deserved. You've built something that embodies everything we try to teach you about service and contribution, but you did it on your own terms and in your own way." Hannah looked around the table at these people who had shaped her, challenged her, and ultimately inspired her to prove that success could take forms they had never imagined. "You didn't fail me," as she said. "You gave me the foundation of values and education that made all of this possible." The disagreement was never about whether to contribute something meaningful to the world. It was about how to do it. As they walked together through the center's main gallery, past exhibits that would inspire thousands of future scientists, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of understanding. The path had been difficult, marked by misunderstanding and financial risk and moments of profound doubt. But it had also been authentic to her vision and values, building something that would outlast any conventional career and create opportunities for students who needed what she had learned to provide. The moral of Hannah's story was not about vindication or proving doubters wrong, but about the courage required to pursue meaningful work even when the people you love most cannot initially see its value. It was about the patience needed to build something substantial while withstanding well-intentioned but misguided pressure to abandon your vision for the comfort of conventional success. Most importantly, it was about the possibility that exists when families learn to support each other's authentic paths rather than imposing their own definitions of achievement and security. Hannah's success had always been measured not in dollars or recognition, but in the students who discovered their love of science through her teaching, the barriers she removed from educational access, and the community she had built around the simple idea that everyone deserves to understand the fascinating world in which they live. Standing in the center that bore her name but reflected her community's needs, surrounded by family members who finally understood her work and students who would benefit from her vision for years to come, Hannah knew that the most important lesson was not about achieving success despite others' doubts, but about creating space for different kinds of success to flourish and be celebrated.